Hello, I'm Leo Sharrock, Head of Data Strategy at the Audience Agency, where I focus on helping cultural organisations to use their audience data to grow audiences and their businesses. With that in mind, I'm going to take a couple of minutes to talk about the online benchmarking tool from MyCake's, which draws on data published by Arts Council England from its National Portfolio Organisations annual reporting to provide some really useful and flexible benchmarking functionality. The tool looks at financial and attendance data and allows users to define and compare benchmarks which can be flexibly drawn from the most relevant or interesting selection of organisations in the portfolio using the various options in the Scenario tab. So, for example, a theatre in the southeast of England with a turnover of £900,000 or more can choose to analyse and compare itself with other similarly circumstanced organisations. The summary then gives an overview of the income streams from which their turnover is derived and compares the situation in the scenario that we've just defined with the national average. So in this case we can see that theatres in the southeast in this scenario generated a greater proportion of turnover through earned income in 2011-12 than was the national average for portfolio organisations overall. If the organisation then enters its own Arts Council England reference number, it can then compare itself with both the regional benchmark and the national average. And in this case we see again that this particular NPO generated a greater proportion of its total revenue from earned income than was the case with similar organisations in the region. If the organisation in question was particularly interested in comparing itself with particularly relevant comparator organisations in another region, it could then simply define the scenario as closely as possible to the desired comparison and see how the benchmark changes. So for example, if we selected to compare to theatres in Yorkshire, similarly circumstanced, we find that our organisation still generates a higher level of turnover through earned income, but that the margin of that difference is reduced in comparison with the relevant similar organisations in Yorkshire than it was with organisations in the theatre's own region. The situation in relation to ACE funding has also changed between the two benchmarks. Whereas our organisation received a higher level of subsidy compared with other similar organisations in the South East, it received less in comparison with those in Yorkshire. So you can see that the tool offers a really flexible way to derive meaningfully defined benchmarks with other organisations in the funded portfolio. It also allows you to look in more detail at the breakdown of income and expenditure, so that we can start to understand themes, for example, like the effect of return on investment relative to the levels of, say, marketing expenditure. What I particularly like about the tool is it's basically putting the speed, power and functionality of a pivot table into a really simple and easy to engage with user interface. It makes deriving simple and relevant benchmarks easy for anyone to do. Organisations will know many of these KPIs in relation to themselves, but without being able to contextualize their performance by comparing to the most appropriate benchmarks, how can you know whether you're succeeding or failing, and how can you set meaningful and realistic goals? All of which adds up to a ringing endorsement of Arts Council's continued publication of these datasets, so that they can provide the basis for these useful tools and add more value to the sector from assets which they've already assembled. I'd encourage you to have a play with the tool, you can't break it, and explore these features in more detail.